Coming up, as the Brooklyn Nets prepare to take on the LA Lakers on Friday night, we talk about Nic Claxton, what's gone wrong with his season to this point, and should we think about his long-term future with the Brooklyn Nets organization, plus Cam Johnson, the trade chatter, maybe some surprise teams on the market. We dive in coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast. Right here in the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Adam Armbrecht, flying solo and live on YouTube. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We're 100% free on all those great platforms, and let you know that from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started today. And just as a little heads up, man, we have not done these as much as we normally had been in the years past. We had a lot of post-game lives that we were doing throughout the course of last season. So wanted to take advantage. Doug's off for the day. I waited until the golden hour, 6 p.m. live on YouTube. We're going to talk about a few different things mentioned at the top. Nic Claxton, there's been this chatter and this concern, this question, maybe frankly, this frustration about what his game has looked like over the course of this season. Should it be a discussion about the $100 million man being a potential trade target for other teams? Where does it kind of land when we think about how much the organization invested in him and whether or not that money is going to scare teams off, whether or not he still has that type of value out there? I think there's a few things. There's a few reasons to consider when we talk about the state of his game. But unlike in years past, where we said, hey, listen, in the Kevin Durant superstar era of this team, Nic Claxton, everybody stands to benefit from having superstars on the court. Now it just feels like we're not necessarily, seeing the progression of Nic Claxton. And maybe we've just kind of reached that ceiling, right? Now, the obvious things to think about would be, and we'll get into, by the way, if you're watching live on YouTube, third segment, we're going to get you guys in here, get the conversation going. Already had some up and running, including some familiar faces talking about when their schedule runs and if they can actually get us early in the morning when we're putting up our episodes Monday through Friday. But there used to be, at least to my mind, this year over year, where are we headed with Nic Claxton as he progresses? I don't mean that negatively. I mean it as a positive, right? It was early, as we all know, early in his career when he was having a hard time just getting reps and getting on the court, right? You go back and you remind yourself that in 2019-20, he only plays in 15 games. He averages 12 and a half minutes. He only plays 32 games in 2020, 2021. The following year is when we start to get the ball rolling, right? Plays in 47, starts 19 games. Then 22, 23, 76 games, 76 starts, playing almost 30 minutes. And likewise, last season, 71, starts every single game of the year and plays almost 30 minutes again. Now, coming to this season, when Doug and I did our projections for all the players, we had a hard time getting Nic Claxton much beyond 30 minutes because it just doesn't feel like, not only is he not that kind of player, but also from a skill set standpoint, how are you going to have him maybe on the court at all times? You're going to need to think about balancing offense, obviously. And then in what is a tank year for the Nets, you just have to think about where are you going to pick your spots with him. And then he's been a little up and down with some injuries. 34 games played, 26 starts, averaging 26 minutes. What's different over these last couple of seasons? The number of shots he's taking are basically on par for these last 3 years, averaging about 8 per game. However, because we know he does a lot of his work around the basket, substantial drop-off. 70% going back to 22-23, only 63% last season, and now 54% this year. The finishing around the rim doesn't look quite the same that it used to. We're not going to have a conversation about the free throws because they're not things that are happening, even though he is knocking down a robust 8.3% on the year. And he's getting to the line, same kind of clip, 2.5, 3 times a game. Not really a big deal. Continues to not be able to succeed in that category either, under 53% on the season from the line. But here's the other thing. Understanding that he's playing 3 to 4 less minutes per game right now, he was close to averaging. He was 9.9 last year in terms of total rebounds. He's a 10 rebound per game guy in 30 minutes. He's only averaging 7.5 now this season. He's averaging under 10 points a game now this season. The blocks have dropped from 2.5 going back 3 seasons to now into this year, averaging just 1.2 blocks per game. Steals are still where you want him to be, obviously. The fouls he's actually fouling less statistically, but some of the more egregious fouls that we've seen from him over the course of this season have looked worse. And frankly, it's just not the same in terms of the player and the impact that he's had, specifically on the defensive end. We always talk about Claxton as being this versatile defender. He's going to be able to track 1 through 5, going to get that out there on the perimeter. There's some advanced numbers here as we'll just go, as we work our way through. Shout out to Gerard, shout out to American Cheese, shout out to Knights, right? We'll be getting to you guys coming up on the back end of the episode. But when you think about some of the advanced numbers that you can go to on him, and I'm specifically talking about, think about this. Over the course of this season so far, offensive and defensive rating, let's just keep it brass tacks simple. October only played in 4 games, so we're not really going to put too much in it. Offensive rating 122.9, defensive rating 105.1. November plays 10 games, averages 26 minutes, up from 21 in the 4 games in October. 108.6 on offense, 113.2 on defense. I mean, a massive drop-off offensively, and then a big uptick in the wrong direction on the defensive end of the court. Plays 12 games in December, averages 27 minutes almost. Minutes are going up, 100 flat. Offensive rating, 116.2 defensive rating. And now, through 8 games in the month of January, averaging his most minutes of any month so far this season, 28, 94.4 offensive rating, 123.6, 123.6 defensive rating. And the net rating is a minus 29.2. Obviously, the worst that we've seen so far this season from him. And talk about assist percentages for his career and like that. Some of those numbers look pretty good. The assist to turnover ratio is the strongest it's been this year in the month of January. So it's not like we're going to sit here and say everything is horrific. However, it is alarming that a player whose calling card is the defensive end of the floor can sit here and talk about having a 123 rating on the defensive end. Now, the idea that when you don't have the talent, we talk about a lot of guys being in these lineups, obviously. You look out on the court and we think about the Brooklyn Nets, and we know in the past handful of games, after the trade of Dorian Finney-Smith, you already had Dennis Schroeder go out of the lineup. When you look and you say, well, we are sitting here running out more often than not, having a Cam Thomas for a long time. You're sitting there running Keon Johnson out there. You're bringing Jalen Wilson off the bench. Noah Klein has gotten into the starting rotation, certainly. Haven't seen any trend in Watford because he's been injured as well. Zaire Williams getting back into the flow of things. Reese Beekman has been getting run. Tosan has been getting run. So we understand that this is not even necessarily 1 through 5, technically a 5-man NBA starting rotation. That's fine. But this is this significant drop-off. And even more than that is the eye test tells you a lot of it. And that goes along with some of the egregious technical fouls, getting thrown out of games and where he's at. Now, there's 1 or 2 ways you can think about this. We said in the offseason when the Nets locked him up, 4-year, $100 million man, we said, listen, it's not a big deal because the Nets have the money to do it, right? And if we think about, because I'll go ahead and pull this up in the background here, if we think about where it's going to go, we don't have to be overly concerned about what it's going to look like as you work your way through this contract. So not unlike, because Cam Johnson, we'll talk about in the second segment, Cam Johnson has a lot of bonus money attached to it. He has some descending money on his contract as well. And he's 28 and he's more established and we understand where he is, right? And he's going to be a highly sought after player. And we're going to talk about him and some of those suitors. But when you talk about Nic Claxton and you realize that his cap hit this year is 27.5, and then 25.3, and then 23.1, and then 20.9. It's descending money until his age 28 season, which is where the contract runs through. So I'm not concerned about having him on this roster going forward. I believe that when you think about a player like him and with his skill set, he's always going to be best suited to be this defensive, versatile defender and a guy that can get out and run and do some things around the basket, right? But the controlled aggression hasn't looked the same this season. The defensive attention to detail has not looked the same this season. The around the basket stuff has not looked the same this season on either end of the floor. And that's concerning. So do we sit here potentially and say, is there somebody that would make a call on a Nic Claxton and have a conversation about, hey, maybe there's a player here that would have value for us, a championship running team, or even a team that is built better to have a player, a non-offensive shooter that has defensive versatility and be able to look at it. Here's what I found interesting about it. There was a Bleacher Report article, and I want to make sure I give credit where it's due. This came out from, as we'll go ahead and hit our first break here in just a moment, But when we looked at the Bleacher Report coming off of Greg Schwartz talking about dream and realistic targets for every team in the NBA, and I was surprised that Nic Claxton came up as Toronto's dream target because of his age, because you have an aging center who's going to be 30, because maybe you want some defensive versatility. So just as a, for instance here, right? If we sit here and we think about the idea of looking at Toronto, and I don't think that this is necessarily a realistic option coming towards the deadline here, although why take anything off the table? And if you're the Brooklyn Nets, why not be open to taking Nic Claxton, someone that maybe you look at that 27 and 25 and descending money and say, I don't know how quickly, depending on what happens with the ping pong balls, maybe we will want to get aggressive after the draft and look at potential stars that we can bring in. How soon will we want to go spend big money? And you can look at it one of two ways. Well, if you don't have Claxton on the team, then you have all the cap space. But if you do have him on the team, now you have salary matching capabilities, right? But I looked at it as when you scroll through, listen, you want to throw Kelly Olynyk into the mix. Why? Because who cares? He's making money. You can put him on the books. Okay, let's go ahead and do that. You can put Nic Claxton over in his $27 million now. You go ahead and bring back the Kelly Olynyk money at 12.8, and you go ahead and you also bring back Boucher, who's making 10.8 as well. That's science solved in terms of making the deal work. Now, the reasons why I'll use the Bleacher Report as the reference here for why they think that Toronto would want to do it. It's the aging Pirtle, obviously there at the center position, thinking about having more versatility potentially. And frankly, unlike the Brooklyn Nets, they already have some of the talent on their roster. Like they already know the direction that they think they want to build in. Although we've heard some buzz about Bruce Brown and whether or not there could be some trade conversations for him and some championship contending teams or playoff teams that want to look at him and potentially see that possibility. Okay, we can have that conversation. The weird thing that I thought about really even more than any of this is, let's just say Toronto is interested in Nic Claxton. What do you want attached to that? You know, Boucher, he's older. Okay, Kelly Olynyk, he's older. Picks? I mean, where do the picks lie? And one thing that I did see coming out of the comments here before we got going was a bad move, a wasted pick by Sean Marks. That part of it, I just go ahead and disagree with vehemently, right? Because you're talking about a guy who was drafted in the second round, pick 31. This is a massive success story, Nic Claxton, and what his career has been to this point. The real question mark is just whether or not you think that he's going to be a player that can contribute and be around the rebuild, whoever you bring in the draft next season, or is he just going to be money matching when you want to go pursue a star? Or is some team going to give you a call and say, we got expiring contracts, we got some picks we want to talk about, let's have the conversation. So things not going in the right direction for Claxton. We'll extend this conversation as we work our way towards the deadline on February 6th. But coming up here in a second, let's get back into that Cam Johnson discussion. I found a couple of these things interesting, including teams that were looked at as dream scenarios to land Cam Johnson, and the only team listed on Bleacher Report's article as the realistic option if they strike out on their home run swing at the deadline. We'll do that here coming up, plus all of your discussions in the third segment in just one moment. All right, before we do that, though, my friends, we got to tell you about our other friends over at Robinhood Gold. With Robinhood Gold, you can now enjoy the VIP treatment, receiving a 3% IRA match on retirement contributions. The privileges of the very privileged are no longer exclusive. With Robinhood Gold, your annual IRA contributions are boosted by 3%. Plus, you also get 4% APY on your cash in non-retirement accounts. That's over 8 times the national savings average. The perks of the high net worth are now available for any net worth. The new gold standard is here with Robinhood Gold. To receive your 3% boost on your annual IRA contributions, you can sign up at Robinhood.com/gold. Investing involves risk. 3% match required. Robinhood Gold at $5 a month for 1 year from first match. Must keep funds in IRA for 5 years. Go to Robinhood.com/boost. Over 8 times the national average savings account invest rate claim is based on data from the FDIC as of November 18th, 2024. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC. Gold membership is offered by Robinhood Gold LLC. All right, as we continue today's Locked On Nets episode live on YouTube, live. We'll go ahead and try to have a little bit of a conversation in the third segment with everybody. Thoughts just about, if you have your thoughts about Nic Claxton, save them. When we get to segment 3, I'll go ahead and start looking over at the comment section when you're flying solo, multitasking. It's really a tall task, but we're going to do it anyway because I believe in showing a little bit of face here. And it's Casual Friday. No suit and tie here, shirt and tie for me, hat, the sweatshirt. We're relaxing. We're chopping it up a little bit. And when we chop it up a little bit, we also think about, I will say, the list of here about dream targets, right? So teams that are listed as dream target would be to get Cam Johnson. The Bucks, we understand why that'd be a dream target, improve the roster there. They don't have a lot of draft capital. The Indiana Pacers, which is an interesting one because you can improve your three-point shooting, give yourself a little bit of defensive versatility as well. I mean, Cam Johnson may not be thought of as the high leverage defensive player, but he's sound, he's fundamental, and he has enough size to be able to work up a couple different matchups there. And Indiana has some size of their own, so you can play him down the lineup a little bit. Cleveland being the other one. And this was thrown up there. A couple people saying, oh, Cleveland's interested. And there's very simple reasons why these don't, some of these don't work. The Bucks don't work to me because, I mean, I don't know what you're offering here and how it's going to work. Now, just like with Cleveland, though, I will say some of these are that third team kind of deal, right? Who's going to be the third team that the Nets can pass through a salary match and get back the additional asset? The curious thing to me is the Cleveland Cavaliers. And I'll tell you why. And you guys, let me know in the comments, right? So Cleveland can only offer, they don't have much to offer here in the way of assets, right? Because if we go ahead and we pull this one up, over on the trade machine, they don't have that many first round picks. Matter of fact, they have 2, but they can only offer one of them in a trade package. So if you're thinking about just on a surface, are you going to be willing to trade Cam Johnson for anywhere, no matter what the other assets are, for 1 first round pick? The bottom line being here, when we talk about the 3 dream scenarios for Cleveland, for Indiana, for Milwaukee, the realistic one is Oklahoma City getting Cam Johnson. And that's because they offer up here, at least by Bleacher Report, a big swing for Zion. And then because that doesn't work out, they go ahead and take the consolation prize in Cam Johnson. We've talked about OKC before, and the simple fact that they have the assets. They have young players you can pick from, whether or not it's going to be Toppich, whether or not you're going to settle for something a little bit less. Okay, fine. But they have enough first-round picks. They have over 30 total draft picks, just like Brooklyn does going forward, right? So you can pick and choose. And in that scenario, we always come back to, once the salaries get matched, let's just have the conversation about how many draft picks do we have to throw in to get the deal done. I find it interesting. Obviously, OKC is one of the best, if not the best suitors and one of the best trade partners for Brooklyn. But if I'm standing here, you can do the first thing, you can do the fun thing, which is say, hey, we got DeAngelo Russell here. Why don't we go ahead and bring old friend Caris LeVert back too, right? He's on the 16.6 expiring contract, so that just makes a lot of sense from a money matching standpoint. Okay, great. And you're not worried about anything else beyond that. I don't know if you could think about him as a pass-through player. He obviously has some value. So unlike when they got DeAngelo Russell in the deal for Dorian Finney-Smith, I can look at Caris LeVert and say, hey, who's the third team? Maybe wants a guy coming off the bench. Like, Caris LeVert can still be something for a team and has a different skill set, unlike, say, DeAngelo, maybe a little bit of redundancy. And obviously, when you come from LA, who is in the playoff push, who wants to be contending for a title, whether or not it's entirely realistic this season, you got to think about the redundancy of that type of player and the willingness for someone to pick up an $18.6 million remainder of it in a pass-through trade. We'll talk about DeAngelo just very briefly at the back end of this episode too, and some of the stipulations around being able to move him. So even if you start with Caris LeVert and you worry about later, one of the other ones that I thought about was Jalen Tyson, who, when we talk about young players and prospects and, where some value might lie, my ears did perk up a little bit. He hasn't played at all at the NBA level. But the fascinating thing about him is he played at 3 different schools in 3 years in college. He went from Texas to Texas Tech to California. Now, Texas, he doesn't really play at all. Plays 8 games, averages 7 minutes. Don't even worry about it. Plays 31 and 30 games. Plays 31 games in the next 2 seasons. Starts 31 and 30, respectively. And in California, as a junior in the Pac-12, going from the Big 12, he goes from averaging 29 minutes the year prior and averaging 8.5 shots per game in those 29 minutes to averaging 34 minutes and taking 15 shots a game. Now, from the field, he's knocking down 51%. Reasonable, respectable number. You get to the three-point shooting. He only had 36% in this last season. Averaged 4.5 attempts per game, though. Averaged 3.5 the year prior, knocked down 40%. So it took a little bit of a dip. Big step up for me, though, in terms of value and just the prospect on surface. 4.5 trips to the free throw line in his junior year. That's a bump of 3 more attempts per game from the year prior, knocks him down at 80%, grabs 7 rebounds, dishes out 3.5 dimes, and is a 19-point plus scorer, nearly a 20-point scorer over those 30 games. Is he the guy, right? I mean, is this the player and the name that we go, oh my goodness, if we could land him in this deal, now we're having, no, of course not. But just in the spectrum of what is OKC going to do, maybe that team falls off the table, right? We've heard sometimes about Memphis and them still being interested in Cam Johnson, but maybe feeling a little bit spurned by the Dorian Finney-Smith conversation. As Doug and I alluded to previously, you can feel like you got scorned and, oh, the team pulled out the last second, went in a different direction, took a different deal. Good for you. End of the day, if Memphis wants to get better and Cam Johnson represents them getting better, then you're going to come back to the table and you're going to have the conversation. But I did think it was interesting just to at least look at a player like that and say, yeah, like there's not a lot of teams where you get overexcited about what they can offer, what players can get put in the mix, and where their pedigree might lie. But it's nice to know that he's, when you look at a player like that, that you can at least think about, yeah, let's develop a 22-year-old who's 6'6", who has some ball handling skills. Go look at the scouting report. They compared him somewhat favorably to a Caleb Martin. Okay. Let's think about developing him underneath Jordy Fernandez. And on top of that, you're talking about $3.3 million this year on his contract. Just if you're going to have a young developmental talent, you might as well also have him in a position where you're going to be able to look at him as someone that will not hinder any decision that you want to make going forward. Maybe ends up being a bench player. Maybe end up developing like you developed Jalen Wilson. He was taken 20th overall too. So the other conversation, whether it's about Cleveland, whether it's about any of these other teams, you do have to make an association about the player value and if you think that that was a worthwhile pick by the Cleveland Cavs. 20th overall. Okay. Do you associate that as being a first-round talent that you could add into your collection, into your pool? That's a discussion worth having. And we know DeAngelo Russell's not going to be here next year. And we know that Cam Johnson won't be here after the trade deadline. And we know that even some of these players, like Keon Johnson, might not be here, right? We don't know what it's going to look like. So I at least thought it was interesting. The other way to consider something like this when we talk about Cleveland is the Brooklyn Nets and Sean Marks going to them and just saying, listen, we got to have one of two conversations, right? The first conversation we can have is about what can you send us? What's the most assets you can give us? So when I looked through this and I sent this off to Cunningham, who's the host of Locked On Cavs, we'll probably have another discussion with him down the line. Again, as the reminder, the Cleveland Cavaliers have a 2030 first-round pick in 2031. They don't have 2029. So you can get that 2031 first-round pick, no protections on it. I don't hate that. That's far enough away that things could look very different for Cleveland by then. Be a post-Donovan Mitchell era of Cleveland Cavalier basketball. Like, I can really get behind that. And then you just go ahead and say, give me a whole bunch of second-round picks, right? Give me 3 second-round picks. Give me that first-round pick. Give me Karis LeVert. Give me Tyson, and we'll roll with it. This is by far maybe the third or even fourth best option that we might discuss when it comes to Cam Johnson in a trade. But it makes sense from a Cavs standpoint because you're a 34-5 team. You stuck with Donovan Mitchell. You didn't trade him away. So let's get aggressive about this and try to make a move and put anything we can out there. But the other thing Sean Marks can turn around and say is, hey, whether or not we want to do the leg lift on Isaac Okoro and where he could end up, whether we want Isaac Okoro or whether we want you to make another move to get us another first-round pick, do the mechanics and come to the table. I would find it very interesting if we got into the discussion about whether or not Okoro could be included and pass through, whether or not they could get another asset, whether they kept Okoro or not, and think about the mechanics of trying to get additional draft capital in the door. I find that really interesting. And I throw it out there just because they've been rumored a little bit and because we don't know how it's going to shake out as you get towards the deadline. There's going to be a lot of teams scrambling. The Cam Johnson of it all is going to be fascinating. And it's just good to cover your bases. Let's just take a peek and think about Cleveland, because if you are a team that's as close as they maybe think they are, you'll move heaven and earth to get enough draft capital to be in that discussion. A team like Memphis maybe would, but maybe not. We talked to Kings, right? Talk to Matt George about them. Where are they at? What are they willing to give up? There's some more draft picks available other places. Is there as much young talent available as well? OKC remains the number one option, but Cleveland, I think, is at least interesting. Can they get a third team involved to pull that off? All right. There's something else going on here. And that's with DeAngelo Russell. And we'll go ahead and take a look at that as well. And then we'll open up to you, fine fellas and ladies. What's on your mind when we talk about Nic Claxton, when we talk about these trade suitors, when we talk about some of these young names that could be in the mix? We'll do that here as we close out today's episode, coming up in just one moment. All right. Before we do that, though, when I found out that Skims was making underwear for men, I was quite frankly intrigued. I've heard so much about their different expectations you can have with those, quality of it from friends and family. So I had to give them a try. Let me go ahead and fill you up here. You know that I've always had issues with my underwear, right? Is that true? Did you guys know about that? Have I been revealing too much over the course of the podcast? Maybe it's fit, maybe it's comfort, maybe they're bunching up, right? Just doesn't feel like you can get a nice, comfortable wear inside your jeans, your shorts, summertime, wintertime, whatever it might be. But Skims has changed all that. Their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic fit. We have all the designs and the perfect balance of comfort and style. You know that you can shop skimsmen's.com at skims.com/LockedOnNBA and Skims stores. Let them know that we sent you. After you place your order, select podcast in the survey and select our show, Locked On Nets, in the drop-down menu that follows. Head over to skims.com/LockedOnNBA today. And of course, when you're done with that, we got one more friend for you, and it's our old friend, maybe our favorite friend. And that's our friends over at FanDuel. Oh, you know, from the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. You know that the FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings, whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to get a little bit of action. I'm a Giants fan. I can't bet on them. I mean, I can bet on them, but it's not going to win a football game this weekend. I got to think about maybe going for the Lions. I got to think about taking the Commanders and a seismic spread as they go on the road. Maybe I will. Jaden Daniels fun to watch, even if he's in my division. You know that you're going to get that extra excitement for the playoffs, and FanDuel's going to have you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official betting partner of the NFL. Oh boy. As this episode, I got to be honest with you, tie a little pretty little bow on it, talking about Nic Claxton, some of the concerns. Maybe they should think about putting him on the market. Talk about Cam Johnson, surprise suitors. Does Cleveland have what it takes? Maybe a little DeAngelo Russell talk. Maybe a little talk with you guys. I knew when I went live, there's no way it was going to be a standard operating 30-minute episode. But we do the best we can. And that includes hydrating, by the way. Let's get into some of the conversation here with you guys on the side. Hopefully you've been enjoying it, including American cheese, not to get totally off track here. But maybe Joe Shane did ruin the Giants. I don't know. Maybe Dave Gettleman did. I don't know. Maybe John Mayer is ruining them. We don't have any way to know for sure what's going on with the Giants. But if you have something you want to talk about, thoughts on Nic Claxton, go ahead and recycle them, even if you had them back up top, so we can keep it flowing here in segment number 3. I will note that one other thing that came out of, so there's actually 2 things that came out of this. The dream target for the Brooklyn Nets, per the Bleacher Report article, is Kuminga. And looking at the Golden State Warriors, we've talked about him before. I'm not knocking it, but Doug, who I think accurately reminded everybody that we think about Golden State as this pedigree team and developing their talent, but really it was the core 3 that came up with the team, yes, 100%, and won the championships. But since then, it's been harder to look at their drafted talent and say, oh yeah, look at what a great job they've done with them. Now, Kuminga's still young. Kuminga's still an athletic talent, and maybe we think about Jordi Fernandez and the development that he's done with some of the players this season already and go, hey, let's just get our hands on him. But that was a little surprising to me. I'll put it that way. Then they mentioned Dang from OKC. And that's going to be the Cam Johnson connection, the team that makes the most sense, the team that has the most assets, and getting their hands on them. So that's just from a dream and realistic scenario for the Brooklyn Nets, the way they're coming from here inside this article. I don't know if I agree with really either one of them. I think the dream would be Topic if I was putting out a dream. And then the realistic would be who cares, to be honest with you. Like, just get me any assets that you can. The other one, though, was DeAngelo Russell getting brought up in the Orlando Magic situation. So I'm going to check in here real quick on some of the comments to see where we're at. Devin Carter is who they need to give up to make a trade. I'm sure you're battling around there nights inside of some of these other conversations. It's a bidding war going on now when we talk about, I'm assuming, Cam Johnson. I think LeVert is an expiring contract. Yes, he is. So you're talking about, if you're thinking about Cleveland, it's about clearing stuff off the books if you're Brooklyn. And that's one of the things that I've noticed too in this totally disjointed third segment. One of the things that I've noticed is when people talk about these trade scenarios, unless it's about a quality player. So when I mentioned, we talk about Cleveland, and when I say someone like Okoro, well, we understand. I mean, he's on a 3-year deal. He's making $10 million this year. That's manageable money. He's still just 23 years old. That's okay. When you get into some of these other trade scenarios and teams are talking about throwing out, guys that have 3 years left and 18 million or 29, 30 years old, the Nets don't want to have to take that back. And so even when we thought about that Raptors deal, like, what's the risk there? It's not terrible because Boucher is on a $10.8 million expiring. And Kelly Olynyk, he has 1 year left. But I can live with having Kelly Olynyk on my roster next season. Why? Because he's 6'11", because he can shoot, because he can play some, you put him in some defensive role. And frankly, he's not going to, first of all, affect your wins and losses. Like, let's just be 100% clear about that. But more importantly is, like, we said this about DeAngelo Russell being on this team through the end of the season. You got to know that the other players can develop and grow still. So you can't just totally blow this thing up and make it a hodgepodge or throw the balls on the court and see what happens. You are talking about a player who's been in 50 games this year for the Cleveland Cavs and is knocking down 43% from deep. So you got to match some salaries here, and Cleveland's got to get into a better position. Whether or not Kelly Olynyk even remains here would be a whole other conversation. Toronto, not Cleveland, would be a whole other conversation. Maybe it's the pass-through. He's 33 years old. Have a discussion. Tell me another team that needs to add a little bit of that piece and get a little bit more coming back in the door. Now, what will be a realistic to see the Orlando trade? Cole Anthony and Jet Howard for Russell. I don't see Jet Howard being a part of it. Not that he's untouchable by any stretch. But if we're thinking about this one, and I wanted to try to reference this if I can. I'm going to try to get up. I want to get up the article here just as far as how they discussed what a deal like this would look like for Orlando and why they would like it. Orlando Magic. So their dream target, by the way, just if you want to know, was LaMelo Ball. Ooh, yeah, that'd be nice, right? Add in that type of talent to your backcourt. The difference of looking at DeAngelo Russell is obviously, one, he's from the area, played high school ball there, certainly. And then you can think about the second team offense or plexing him into the starting lineup. But when you think about their roster, they've got guys that are talented, but certainly are not the same offensive talent that we think about when it comes to DeAngelo Russell. And we already saw this in a few games that he's played with for the Brooklyn Nets. And we remember when he was back here, but his game is, I think, evolved obviously over the years, where it has this methodical kind of systematic pace. Doug talked about, hey, set up the screen at the top of the key, go underneath it, little pick and pop, not a problem. But if you're looking at the Orlando Magic right now, and you're thinking about Jalen Suggs and you're thinking about Cole Anthony, those are probably the two guys you think about first. Suggs is out right now. Even a Cole Anthony, though, I mean, again, just 24 years old. If you're a Nets fan, you hate the idea of someone who's only 6'2" being on your roster, former first-round pick going back to 2020. But you're sitting here looking at his stat lines and seeing a player that's shooting under 40% on the year and is shooting under 30% from the field, right? From beyond the arc. Like that alone is reason enough. And then you think about DeAngelo Russell being able to unlock a little bit of your offense as well. Right now, in averaging just 15 minutes, because his minutes have been greatly reduced coming off the bench now this year, but he's only averaging 2.7 assists right now coming off that bench. It's only 15 minutes. So if you're Orlando and you can bring in a player that can go ahead and elevate that role, that can go ahead and look to increase his minutes up towards 20 and 20 plus, that to me is the kind of move that makes a lot of sense for a team that wants to be pushing for it. And oddly enough, man, when you go and look at the NBA stats right now, it'll take me a second to get these pulled up. But this is one of those things where, like, Orlando is in a funky spot. They have young talent. They've had some injuries this year. We understand that. But when you go and look at, start with field goal percentage, right? Well, who's among Orlando is 44% from the field. That's third worst in the league. They're only above the Hornets and the Magic, right? So that means that's a problem. They're only averaging 104.5 points per game. Their three-point shooting. This is, again, another team that is only averaging under 31% from deep. So can DeAngelo Russell drastically improve what your offense looks like? Yeah, I think he can. Veteran, experienced player. And then you can even go the step further. Think about the assists right now for the Orlando Magic. 4th lowest in the league, 23.6 assists per game. So that is a very interesting one. And if it doesn't take that much to facilitate it, I think that if you're the Brooklyn, I mean, this to me it'd be a no-brainer in terms of getting something out of a player like DeAngelo Russell because it's expiring. Do you worry about what the Nets roster and rotations look like after? Sure you do. But you still have Keon Johnson. You would get Cole Anthony back in the mix. Not that he's the perfect player, but you'd be getting something back in the process. And, a couple of second rounders, sure. And we can do it real quick here. And I see American Cheese asking a question. I'll get to you in just one second. If we want to go ahead and take a look at this, just to line the money up on it, because now we talked about Nic Claxton and just, hey, listen, it's speculative, but it's a conversation that's out there. We've talked about Cam Johnson and maybe a sleeper that would have to do some lifting in the Cleveland Cavaliers. $12.9 million for Cole Anthony. So swing him over to the Nets and swing Cam Johnson over to the Orlando Magic. Still got to clear only $2.1 million. Only another 2.1 to get it off the books. So you can have whatever conversation you want about anybody that you want. Listen, I don't know. Maybe you want to be aggressive, right? Is DeAngelo Russell worth a player in Anthony Black that is young, only 20 years old, but clearly hasn't quite gotten where they were hoping he was going to get to over this point of his career just yet? Still very young, obviously, drafted in 2023. But he's knocking down the three-point shot. He's been a different type of player this year than he was last year, but his rating in terms of on-off has been a little bit funky. I don't know. You get aggressive, you ask for him. But you don't have to worry about that too much because you can go down their list here and grab anything you want. Corey Joseph, $3.3 million. Great. Put him in the mix. Done. Right? So you add Corey Joseph, the money adds up, and then you go in and you just start eating away at their draft picks. They have 23, by the way. And maybe you even want to go ahead in a situation like this where you're not talking about getting first-round talent. Hey, why don't we just go ahead and take a look at some of the pick swap opportunities, right? More favorable for Brooklyn. We want one and a second-round pick, right? So rights to swap, maybe that all kind of comes out in the wash. So the questions that came up here before we close out. I saw what Claxton to Toronto for Bruce Brown and that Indy 26 round first. The Bruce Brown piece is interesting. I think there's some contending teams that are going to want to be a part of it. So you can have the discussion about, can the Nets pass him through? I like the idea. Let's send Claxton to Toronto. Let's get back Bruce Brown. Let's send Cam Johnson to Cleveland. Let's get back Karis LeVert. Let's just slowly build back past vibes on the Brooklyn Nets roster. But Bruce Brown is someone that I think some teams are going to be interested in. What his value is going to be interesting. And the Nets, again, can end up being this fluid kind of team that is sending out some of the players they want to unload, like Cam Johnson, maybe like a DeAngelo Russell, and then also looking and saying, these other teams that want to grab a Bruce Brown, well, we can take the dump money coming from, I've heard LA has been rumored a little bit to be interested in Bruce Brown. You want to dump your money here and then get Bruce Brown to you and we get another little extra pick? Not a problem, right? So I think the Nets can be in those as well. I don't know what is going on here. Jersey boy, I don't want to get crazy. Cole Anthony and 2 first-round picks is enough. I'm assuming we're having a conversation about somebody other than D'Lo, obviously. As Gerard mentions, keep D'Lo. We are trading a very good point guard for pennies on the dollar. I'm just going to assume you're saying there. Yeah, it's not about that. He's an expiring contract. There's a reason why the LA Lakers, who want to be a competitive team, are looking at north of $18 million on DeAngelo's contract this year and saying it's not worth it, right? So again, the functionality of the offense and having someone on the team to run the point, that does matter. And I ultimately think that D'Lo will stay here. But just when you hear some chatter, when you think about a team like Orlando that wants to improve their backcourt, there's something to happen there. And yes, in any of these scenarios, whether it's Bruce Brown as someone threw up from Toronto, you can turn around and flip him, right? Whether Cole Anthony comes through, I don't think he has any flippable value. But like I said, Kelly Olynyk, that's another conversation to have. If Cleveland wanted to get into it and the Nets couldn't feel comfortable about where the picks were going to be, and you can get Okoro in that deal, great. Let's talk about flipping him, right? So any of these scenarios, the third teams are kind of what we're talking about right here, right? Having some third team options solely for the purpose of getting another draft pick That's the way you look at some of these other options we talked about today. It's not like OKC, who can give you players and give you picks, or even Memphis, who can do the same kind of thing, right? This is maybe we see a best of all worlds here where we can make the trades, get the picks, only have expiring or pass through contracts, and by the end of it, turn around and say, look how clean our cap sheet is going into this offseason. Because whether it's about getting to the ping pong balls and saying, what did we end up pulling in here when we look at the draft position and who we're going to go with? We got 4 picks going through the first round, right? It could be a very different built team as we head into this offseason. And I think I totaled it up. I think it's something like 20 million, maybe 25 million if the Nets drafted all their picks and where they would slot in from a cap standpoint. So you will pick up some there. Nothing that big or nothing that major. But do we want to go pursue somebody? Right? Because once you get through this draft, even though there's more future first-round picks, this is the one where you have that control, right? So if you feel like there's a move to make to go get a player, you can start to have that conversation as soon as next offseason, assuming that you get Spike Lucky and get Flag, get Harper, right? If you land one of those players, then you can immediately start to have that different conversation. That being the case, my friends, I want to first off tell you, thanks for coming in. Thanks for coming in. D'Lo too good for the tank is being mentioned. Could be. Bogdanovich is another guy we'll talk about. It's interesting to think about him. Yeah, he hasn't been able to get back on the court. If he could, then maybe, just maybe, we could dream on what that would look like. Potentially, that's a salary matching maneuver here if there's some decision that had to get made. But I find it really hard to think about that. So we will continue to talk about this going into next week. As I mentioned, we know that the Nets are taking on the Lakers later tonight. We know that their upcoming schedule has a lot of losing potentially on it. And we also know the Nets have been doing a lot of losing to begin with, right? But when you look at them after they take on the Lakers, we're also going to see them go ahead and have OKC. So OKC will get a firsthand look maybe at Cam Johnson if he's back in the lineup, back in the mix. Come back for New York, home for Phoenix, home for Miami. Up until the point that they trade Jimmy Butler, his suspension's over, be on the court. Still a difficult game there. Sacramento, another potential suitor for Cam Johnson. They'll be in town on the 27th. And you close out the month at Charlotte, and then you'll go into February with just a few games, only 3 more in February. At Houston, home for Houston, and then home. Oh, the spicy one. Washington Wizards before the deadline strikes. So there's a handful of games where we talked about Nets are going to do a lot of losing, and we have to think about what's going to come as we work our way towards that deadline. And yes, my holy king, trade goofy Day'Ron Sharpe. Well, you don't have to be mean about it. King, by the way, good to see you in here. He's another one that we can discuss. There's some lower level guys, and there's been some conversations in these trades where you've seen a Day'Ron Sharpe get thrown into the mix. There's just been a couple I think that fans have thrown out there where it's like Day'Ron Sharpe as an inclusion inside of a Cam Johnson trade that only gets you 2 first-round picks straight up, basically, and then salary match. That did not feel like enough for me. That felt like we're just going and giving away assets. Because remember, just like we talked about at the top with Nic Claxton, if we're going to have a conversation about the $100 million 4-year contract for him, descending money, maybe they'll move off of him, they can rinse and repeat if they want to this offseason and sign Day'Ron Sharpe. Not going to be a $4 for $100 million deal for him, but they can bring him back on a deal and then figure out what it looks like. And that's what I find so fascinating about after this deadline. You want to see Day'Ron play more this year. Even if the Nets end up paying him a bit, you want to see him play more so that you can kind of keep putting out that vibe that maybe he's that glue bench guy, that backup big that team should want to come after. Even if it's not this year at the deadline, let's talk about it in the offseason. Let's talk about it around the draft. Are the Nets there and they want to make a marginal move from one of their first-round picks? That's when I think players like that become even more interesting. So, no noise. Yeah, no noise on Ben Simmons. No, there's not a lot of chatter on old Benny Simmons. I wouldn't anticipate that being a factor here, although we all know you have to at least mention his name once when we talk about it. That being the case, my friends. First of all, awesome. I don't know if you guys had a good time. I had a great time. This has been a lot of fun for me. Happy to be doing a live again. We're going to take a look and think about potentially, maybe we'll come back in As I mentioned, it's a 7 p.m. game on Sunday. So maybe we'll do a post-game live. Haven't done one of those this year. If we go that route, it's going to be probably yours truly flying solo. Got NFL action over this weekend. So we'll wait and see. But might switch it up a little bit. Might start doing some of these post-game coverages as we head towards the deadline and come out of it, because we want to be able to chop it up. Misery loves company. And certainly we always enjoyed last season being able to get in with you guys a lot. So we're going to try to do it a little bit more as this season rolls along. But until next time, you get us over on YouTube at Locked On Nets. You get us on the podcast feeds. You leave those 5-star reviews. It's 5 stars or bust. You get over to YouTube. Let's bump the numbers up. We're pushing towards that 8,000 mark. It's a dream for Doug. Let's give him that little wish before the trade deadline. Let's really hustle on that one. And then, of course, over on X at Adam Armbrecht, at Doug Norrie, at Locked On Nets. And until next time, as is always the case, when there is no Doug Norrie, there is no quote. Short of saying that I miss my friend and I can't wait until he's back so we can keep talking all things Brooklyn Nets basketball. Basketball, 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 basketball. Yeah.